Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Scott Sonenshein. Scott is the Henry Gardner Simmons Professor of Management at Rice University and New York Times bestselling author whose books have been translated into over 20 languages. His award-winning research, teaching, and speaking has helped Fortune 500 executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals in industries such as technology, energy, healthcare, retail, education, banking, manufacturing, and nonprofits. He holds a Ph.D. in organizational behavior from the University of Michigan, a master's in philosophy from the University of Cambridge, and a BA from the University of Virginia. His research appears in the very top academic journals and has contributed to several topics in management and psychology, including change, creativity, personal growth, social issues, decision-making, and influence. Scott sits on 5 distinguished editorial boards and is a former associate editor of his field's top publication, the Academy of Management Journal. Scott also worked as a strategy consultant for companies such as Microsoft, AT&T, and lived through the rise and fall of the dot-com boom while working for a Silicon Valley startup. He serves as the external advisory board of McKinsey & Company's implementation practice. Scott has written for the New York Times, Time Magazine, Fast Company, and Harvard Business Review. He has been interviewed on national and local television, NPR stations throughout the country, and has been featured in most major newspapers. Please join me in welcoming Scott Sonenshein. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
It's a delight to have you. So, Scott, as you know, this podcast, Work from the Inside Out, is all about all the different changes that people make in their lives and their careers, hopefully to pursue greater satisfaction and meaning in their careers and the kinds of contributions that they can make throughout their lives. And from what I've seen in some of the books, your books that I've read, Stretch and Joy at Work, that you co-authored with Marie Kondo, both of those really have made significant contributions in addition to all the research and teaching that you're doing at Rice University. But where did this all begin? Where did it start? Tell us more.
Well, there's not a starting point, as I think most people find in their careers. When you look backwards, you can probably connect the dots. But when you're living in the moment, sometimes the lines are kind of hard to see them all connect. So for me, I never intended to be an academic, a professor, a writer. I was in an undergraduate program. I studied economics and philosophy, and I was doing what I think a lot of people in those professions or in those academic disciplines do, which is really trying to figure out what they wanted to do after graduation. And a lot of folks in those majors end up going to law school or going to graduate school. And I taken the LSATs, I had applied, I had gotten into some pretty good law schools, and I was so close to the moment where I was going to go ahead and do it. My older sister is an attorney, my twin sister's an attorney. So, I mean, if you kind of looked at me at the time, you're like, okay, you're going to go to law school,
right,
and go be an attorney. And as I was about to make the final decision about what I wanted to do, I had a wonderful mentor at the University of Virginia who started asking some questions about, well, why are you going to law school? What is it that you find appealing and attractive about it? And I think, like a lot of people, I don't think we take enough time to reflect on our choices. We get put into what we believe are socially prescribed pathways for how we ought to be doing something, or what an acceptable type of career actually looks like. And I was going down that lane. And I think if it were not for his prodding, I would have ended up going to law school, and maybe I would have enjoyed it. But I don't think so, actually. Yeah. So I'm really glad for that intervention. So yeah. decided to go do a 1-year graduate program over in England and kind of think about how I wanted to start my career. And as I was doing the master's degree, I became very interested in research and organizational psychology and things all related to work and how do we think about and improve the day-to-day lived experience of people at work. And so I went back to my same mentor. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to sign up for graduate school now. He's like, no, you don't want to do that yet because you've got to get some perspective out there. And so go get a quote unquote regular job and see how you like it. And if you like it, stay in that pathway. And if you don't like it, then you are choosing with knowledge about what kind of the counterfactual would look like. So I spent a year in Washington, D.C. as a strategy consultant, and it was okay. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a terribly inspiring career, but it was a pretty good way of learning some important skills, analytic skills to start my career. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, about a year into my job, I got a phone call from a recruiter from a Silicon Valley startup. And they gave me what seemed like an absolutely unbelievable pitch, which was, Scott, come out here. We're gonna double your salary. We're going to give you a fancy title. You're going to manage some people. We're going to give you a 7-figure budget to manage. And, of course, your stock options are going to make you an absolute fortune. And that was the thinking of a lot of these companies back then.
Sure.
I'd never been to California. I'd never been to the Bay Area. So sure, I went out there for the trip, and lo and behold, 3 weeks later, I moved out there. And
Wow.
I went out there to really what I call in my book Stretch, it's really kind of chase. I wasn't really thinking about what I actually wanted to accomplish. What I was thinking about are kind of just trying to get more of whatever that might be, more power, influence, more money, more people to manage, and so on. And the atmosphere out there, for those of you not familiar with what the dot-com boom looked like, is it was just, money was flowing all over the place. This company was hiring people every week, just in enormous amounts. And we were growing like crazy for my first 6 months out there until the stock market crashed, the dot-com bubble dried up, and all of a sudden the spigots turned off. And we were really exposed for what we were, which was a company really without a viable business plan. So kind of just like individuals can get into this type of behavior where we just, think that more is always the answer to things. Organizations do this all the time as well. And they thought, the more people we hire, the faster we grow, the bigger we get, the better we're going to be. And that turned out not to be the case. So I went through, I survived 4 rounds of downsizing, which is, obviously very, very difficult for anyone, but especially in a tightly knit company where I'd be working 14-hour days. I knew these folks very well and was very good friends with them, and they were great people. But we were in an organization that didn't really have a purpose, a reason to exist, and that inspired me for realizing it was time to go back to graduate school. So I really thought about what my mentor had said. I had kind of pursued this kind of more traditional lane, and realized it really made me curious. It made me curious to understand what it is about people's careers and their organizations that makes them kind of do things that don't necessarily serve their best interests, whether it's, taking a job like I did that really wasn't very helpful or consistent with the goals that I had or the values that I had, or as an organization, how we can kind of go awry and run this large enterprise that really doesn't have a purpose. So I went to the University of Michigan and got a Ph.D. in organizational behavior and tried to answer some of these questions, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
So just want to go back a little bit to the time when you got the offer to go to Silicon Valley and work with the startup. Did you confer with your professor at UVA before you took that job?
It's a great question. I did not, and I never thought about it. Maybe that was my mistake, not to have that touch point and have someone in my support network and say, what am I doing here? Does this, what do you think of this? And I can imagine I probably would have said, probably not a good idea. But what's so interesting about our careers and what's so interesting about as humans is just our incredible capacity to make meaning. And
yes.
At some level, that was the wrong job for me. But it also, helped me get to where I am today because
of course.
It taught me about some things and inspired me to go to graduate school and write about and try and research and understand my experiences. And that would have never happened. And that's why, sometimes when we kind of look back on our careers, we, maybe we see like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have taken this turn, or maybe I should have went this way instead of that way. But then as we kind of have the benefit of time to be able to look back and reflect on things, these things usually are done for a reason, and they often end up teaching us important things that contribute to who we are today.
Absolutely. And if you had not taken those steps, who knows what today would look like, right? Because even though you had your sights set on going ahead with further graduate school, it still may have ended up being different. And I get the feeling that you do like where you are today. But I'm curious about how long were you out in California?
About a little over 2 years.
Okay. So, and you survived 4 rounds of downsizing. So the company must have been happy with your performance. Because I remember what happened at that time in a lot of companies and how things, as quickly as things built up, just as quickly things started to crumble. I remember that very well. Did you know at the time when you were there that it wasn't a great fit for you?
I'd say yes and no. I think when I was there, I think like a lot of people, I got caught up in just the sheer exuberance of what it's like to be at a place that just feels like it's increasingly expanding and growing, and nothing is out of reach. And me with my 1 year of work experience had all of this responsibility, and then of course you multiply that across other people with my background at the company, and maybe it's not a surprise that we didn't really do so well. So I think that part of it was easy to get caught up on. Now, of course. Yeah. When that spigot gets turned off, and this is what you often see with chasing, is it's kind of like you're kind of like exposed, like kind of the what things actually really are when you kind of chip away at all of the veneer that's hiding all of that. And so I knew that probably about a year into the job, and it was about how do I think about transitioning from out of this. Obviously I had to wait to leave until the fall to start a new program, but. Probably took about a year, I'd say.
Yeah, I see. So when you finished your program in Cambridge, and you went back to meet with your professor at UVA, who sounded like that person really had a pivotal role in your life, and you said, "I think I want to go on further with grad school," and he said, no, you need to go out and work in the real world first. Did you know what kind of grad school program you wanted to do at that time? Were you already interested in organizational behavior and those kinds of things?
I'd say marginally interested, but no, I was not 100% certain, far from 100% certain. I actually had never taken a psychology course as an undergraduate, which is really weird now that I'm an organizational psychologist. I probably was the only one in my program who had zero psych background, not even Psych 101 as an undergraduate. So I didn't know much about the profession. It certainly wasn't the background of my advisor either. But what really piqued my interest was just trying to search for a discipline that would help me understand my own experiences and those of the people that I worked with during that time in Silicon Valley. And that's how I got into the field.
Yeah. I see. So it's something that really developed as you went through those different experiences. And so since then, you've just been moving it forward. You finished your doctorate at University of Michigan, and then moved on to Rice University since then.
Right. So I've been at Rice for 14 years now. So it's actually my first job as an academic, the only job I've had. And I've been thinking a bit about this because one of the things that's interesting about the academic field is the same job that I was hired to do in 2007 when I first started is basically the same job that I do today, and that's pretty unusual for a lot of people in their careers.
Yeah.
Think about shifting responsibilities, moving laterally, moving up, and maybe taking on more responsibilities. But the role of a professor is very much the same if you're 1 year out or if you're at the end of your career. So as I've kind of been thinking about that, one of the questions that kind of went through my mind about 5 years ago was, how do I kind of continue to stay sharp? And we know from the research that task novelty is really important in terms of job engagement and job meaning. And that's one of the reasons why I started writing books is it's kind of a related thing, but it's also very different than doing kind of an academic paper was how do I take the job that I have right now and transform it in ways that continue to challenge me, because after doing something for so many years, it's sometimes you feel like it's time for new challenges.
Right. And so that's where Stretch came in. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. So tell us more about Stretch, because I think it really does. It drew me in right away in terms of the whole notion of chasers versus stretchers. Not that there's an us and them kind of thing. I don't mean it quite like that, but the notion of it felt like a mindset kind of thing that many of us, like you yourself, you went out to Silicon Valley kind of as a chaser in some ways, right? You were, but it's also about looking for opportunity, but there's other things that go along with that kind of mindset. And yet your research shows that, how do we say this? Chasers don't prosper as much as they think they do.
Yeah. So what the research shows is that when we're chasing, in the long term, it's not a strategy for success or satisfaction. And when you're chasing, what happens is your goals get displaced. Just like my goals were displaced when I went to Silicon Valley. You're not thinking about what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. This almost infatuation with having more takes away from what it is that you actually want to be doing. And you become so focused on a goal and achieving a goal that you don't even value. And that's what's dangerous about chasing. And that's why it doesn't lead to long-term success. Now, in the short term, it might feel successful. Just like when I took that job, I felt very successful. 3 months into that job, I felt very successful. Here I was. I had this, great job. My salary doubled. I had this staff to manage. I had this big budget. But at the end of the day, why I was there, the purpose of my organization, those were non-existent.
Yeah.
And, that thing disappeared just as quickly as it came. So when we want to think about long-term success, we want to think about the goals that we actually have. With chasing, we get really seduced by this idea of social comparisons. It could be to your friends, it could be to other people that you know in your industry. And kind of the way I like to think about this is, if you looked at your LinkedIn feed, how many times on that LinkedIn feed do you constantly get bombarded with, so-and-so got a promotion, they got a new job, and you start to tell yourself, well, if I'm not doing this, then I'm not successful. Now, of course, we know from the research that people disproportionately put ratios can be 3-to-1, 4-to-1, depending on the study, positive news to negative news on social media. So you don't see on LinkedIn, for example, I just got fired, or my company went out of business, which happened to me, right? I mean, I got fired, but my company went out of business. I'm not posting that on LinkedIn. And so, because, we're seeing all these social signals, it kind of makes chasing a really seductive strategy to take, because we have a very jaded view of what people's careers are like and what their lives are like.
Right. Yeah. You don't post on LinkedIn. I've been looking for a job for 6 months.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And so, yeah, and I think I was just looking at something in the book here where you say, the problem is we routinely overestimate the importance of acquiring resources, but even more significantly, we underestimate our ability to make more out of those we have. And I think it's true when people are looking for more. I feel like it's a very American thing. I don't know. Maybe it's true in other countries too, but it seems like we're always wanting, bigger is better and more. And not to say that we shouldn't want to take care of ourselves, right? But I think that, we sometimes overlook what we already have to give, what the strengths that we already bring to the table, whether it's, as individuals or even as an organization. And so there's this urge to grow and to do better when in fact, maybe what we already have actually has value, right?
Yeah, although I would put that a little differently. I think
Sure.
that growing is an important part of the stretching mindset. I think
Yes.
what's different is the way that we think about what growing means. And with
Yes.
stretching, we're growing towards goals that we care about. With chasing, we're going after goals that we don't value. And so stretching comes in as kind of the different type of mindset. So if we're going to throw out this idea that we've always got to go after more resources, well, what do we replace that with? And stretching is based on a lot of my own research studies about the science of being resourceful. And instead of asking the question, what more do I need? You ask the question, what more can I do with what I already have? And that could be, both like actual, like tangible resources. Like, I went out, and when I started graduate school, my income basically went to nothing, right? I went from, having this high paying job in Silicon Valley and the promise of, lots of money to basically being on a graduate student stipend. So it's like, well, how do you get more done with fewer resources? So you can think about that. You can think about people that you might have on your team. You can also think about intangible resources like time. How can you
Right.
use time in more effective ways that allow you to get more done during the day? The idea is if we get rid of this infatuation of always, where am I going to get more resources, and to think that I can't solve a problem unless I have more resources. If we replace that with a mindset that says, let me just first look inward and say,
Yes.
what do I have and how can I do more with it? You will often find that it is the pathway to greater success. And there's a pretty simple explanation for that, which is the way that the brain works is when we put ourselves under moderate amounts of constraints, we liberate our brain. So we talked about how like social comparisons want to put us in a very specific lane. But when we put constraints on ourselves and we have these moderate amounts of constraints, we give ourselves almost like this permission slip to think about doing things in non-conventional ways. Mm-hmm. So we break that kind of logic around we've got to do, what social comparisons and social expectations are telling me, and we replace it with almost this like blissful creativity that says, okay, I'm not bound by conventions or these social comparisons. What can I do with the stuff that's already in my life? And that's where some of our greatest work comes from.
I love it. I'm curious, since we are doing this interview when we are still in the midst of this pandemic, what kinds of things may have become possible as people were staying put or staying home more? The kinds of things. I mean, I think of, small things like people baking bread instead of going to the store and buying bread, or I would imagine you might have other examples of things people might have done differently during this time as they sort of kept their, let's say, geographic sphere a little smaller.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a time for a lot of people in both their professional lives and their personal lives to really unlock their inner resourcefulness. And my hope is that it's taught them some, this given them this confidence that they can do it. I mean, one of the things I've missed most about, having to be in this pandemic is eating out of restaurants. I love food, and I'm a terrible cook. I don't know how to really make much. What happened is I've got two daughters. 13 and 8, they kind of saw how my wife and I, well, we're not finding opportunities to go out to dinners, we're staying home, and they learned how to cook themselves. They watched some videos, and every week during the throes of the pandemic, they researched a new culture, made up a menu based off of traditional food from that culture, decorated the dining table, and cooked us a 3-course meal. And it was absolutely delicious. They have turned into like really, really good chefs. And of course, at the end of the meal, I would get a hug and not a bill, right? Which resourcefulness is even just icing on the cake.
Now, did you leave them a good tip?
Well, they have a place to live in the middle of a pandemic.
I was going to say, buy low, sell high, right? That's wonderful. I love hearing those kinds of stories, but it really does bring the point home beautifully. I was also enjoying, there were, a multitude of stories in Stretch of just so many examples of Stretch and in so many different contexts. But I thought I would just share one that I just got a kick out of. I think I may have even heard this before at some point, but this was the whole notion of, how we identify ourselves, or having multiple identities. And it was a story of Betty Nesmith Graham, who ended up coming up with liquid paper. I thought that was a great story. She had been I think a secretary, right?
Yep.
And she worked in a bank, and she was worried about losing her job at some point, and she had been making a lot of mistakes. And then one day saw some painters, I guess they were in the building doing some painting, and she kept making mistakes on the typewriter, those of us who remember typewriters, and ended up taking some of the paint and using it on some of her typing mistakes. And from there on in, she ended up, I guess, inventing liquid paper.
Right. And what I love about that example is it underscores a couple of things with stretching. One is it's accessible to anyone. Doesn't matter if you're the secretary or the CEO. This is something that is helpful for all of our careers.
Yeah.
It shows the generativity that comes when we face constraints, right? Her back was against the wall. She was worried about her career, and the mind is often working in very unconscious ways, and she's processing all these things happening around us, and she's observing of some things. Some things are just happening in the background, and she makes a connection, and that connection, I'd say, is because again, when you actually have your back against the wall, or you feel like your back is against the wall, that is the time when you get that permission slip to really think unconventionally.
What do you think people can do to really help that along? Are there things people can do? Because I think sometimes I've seen as a coach, where people, when their back is against the wall, they almost freeze up. I don't know if that's more of an anxiety dynamic, but are there things that when, if somebody's been, under a lot of stress, and they, even though their back is against the wall, they might almost feel frozen, like less creative. Are there things from your research that you've seen that help to open people up?
Right. So there's actually a psychological term for this. It's called threat rigidity. And when people feel threatened, which is a little different than feeling a sense of constraint, that's when we tend to get a constriction of how the mind thinks and a reduction in creative output. So that's definitely a risk that's out there. The way that we handle that risk is we have a sense of a separation between kind of the situation that you're in and the person that you are. And so embracing resourceful identity, thinking about a moment in which, before in your life, you have had your back against the wall and how you got out of it, kind of just a simple reflection prompt like that builds up your sense of self-efficacy and your sense of resourceful identity that can help overcome that type of threat rigidity.
Great. So, it's interesting also to hear about the way that you've taken your research and put it out there, not just in terms of academic journals, but in the form of books that, the general public would find interesting, which I think is wonderful. And you also do some consulting in addition to your academic work. Is that right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the role of an academic is, as you spend more time doing this job, I think a lot of people can take a number of different paths in their careers. For some people, kind of doing more of the same is what they find rewarding and fulfilling. For me, I wanted a more diversity of tasks. And I guess kind of what was going through my mind is I spend all of this time. It could take about 5 to 7 years to write an academic paper, by the way. I don't know if most people realize the amount of time and effort that goes into this thing. I think I had a paper I started my first year in graduate school that did not come out in print until after I had tenure. So I just, it's a little depressing sometimes. So you spend all this time doing this and, makes important scientific contributions. But a typical academic paper just gets read by other academics, and there's not too many of us, especially when you think about subdiscipline. So it's about how do I take my message and have a bigger impact. So what I've been doing since about 5 years ago was basically doing two tracks for that. One is writing to the general public through books or through paper or magazine articles, and talking about my research and how it translates into helping people in their everyday lives, both at work and also in their home lives. As a way of, I find it gratifying to be able to take these things that I've been spending a lot of time doing and just kind of share them in as many different modalities as possible. The other thing I've been doing is speaking mostly to corporate audiences, talking about stretch and joy at work, which was interesting itself. Came out in the middle of a pandemic, which is a separate conversation on that one. But to kind of talk about how these are principles that are helpful for how individuals can think about their careers and their work, but how organizations can also think about their culture and their practices and how we can create a sustainable way of growing. Because growth is good, but growth that gets fueled by chasing usually ends up in disaster. And,
Right.
My firsthand experiences have taught me.
Yeah. Well, and I can imagine that even though a lot of what we've been doing now is more virtual, that still your message around stretch is still totally applicable, if not even more applicable, given that people have felt some of the limitations of the last year and a half. Would you say that's true?
No, absolutely. I mean, how do you go from the limitation of having in-person meetings to now being virtual? How do you go from, depending on the industry, there have been some very clear winners in this economic cycle, but there have also been some organizations and industries that have been completely decimated as well. Both, I think, are really trying to struggle and think about, how can we continue to innovate when maybe we have fewer people or we have less time because we've got lots of things going on. We're also trying to work from home and we've got children at home. How do I come up with a way of being able to not even just find balance, but just find sanity? I got virtual school myself, and I understand those challenges very well. How do we think about repurposing our business model, which has been completely upended by just how people shop, how people get information, what people are doing with their time? I mean, there's been so much change out there. And one of the things with stretching is it is a strategy for how you can constantly adapt. You can't control if you have few resources or a lot of resources. A lot of that is out of your hands. But what you can control is what you do with what you have, whether that be a little or whether that be a lot. And if you can develop practices that help you as an individual or help organizations as a collective be able to get more productivity out of what they already have, it's good for everyone.
Yeah. What kinds of things have people been asking you about in the last year? Have the kinds of questions that come your way changed, or is it's still pretty much the same?
I'd say I think there's always kind of the timeless questions. How do we deal with constrained budgets? We feel like we never have enough time to do anything. There's just been so much disruption in our industry with it, right? So I think you have those sets of questions. But then you also have questions that I think are very much driven by the pandemic. Like, how with the constraint of not having face-to-face interactions, can we have meaningful dialogue and build connections among our team members. How, as individuals, can there, like, there's a lot of employee well-being initiatives in organizations right now. How can we give people work-life balance when they feel like everything is kind of all blowing up at once, and they find themselves as wearing many different hats at work, maybe because of organizational changes, lots of uncertainty, many different hats at home where, they're now also school teachers as well. And, all these things. So how do we kind of manage those types of boundaries and balances is kind of the second I think, pandemic specific types of things that are coming up.
Well, I would imagine that the principles of stretch can be extremely helpful to people throughout all this time. And to, I think, help people really discover parts of themselves they didn't even know existed, I can imagine, and provide them with almost, both to uncover a resourcefulness they may not have even realized was there, but almost uncover a part of themselves that they might not have known was there.
Yeah, it does seem that people are using this disruption to think very seriously about the choices that they've made in their lives. And I think anytime kind of mortality salience is high, see what's going on in the pandemic, people tend to be a little more introspective about their choices. And, maybe they'll come to realization that a lot of their lives have been, living more according to chasing. And that's not what they want to be doing. That certainly would be a silver lining, because I do think in the long term, they'll be better off if they get off that pathway, because it's usually the chasers, they either kind of, crash or burn out is usually kind of what tends to happen.
Right. Well, we certainly hope that people will keep stretching for sure. So I am curious, of course, Joy at Work came out right in the middle of all of this, and your co-author, Marie Kondo, how did that come about? It seems like when I think of her, I think of how I fold my t-shirts. and I still can't fold my t-shirts very well, but I loved the way the book was organized, and was looking at different sections and the way it was put together. But I was curious how the two of you found each other.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I had kind of the same kind of initial reaction that you did, which is these seems like our backgrounds are very different. And what's interesting is when I was doing my book tour for Stretch, I actually would get a couple of questions from the audience members, and they would say, "Okay, well, tell me, how does stretching relate to Marie Kondo's work?" And at first, I was like, "Oh, that's
really
kind of an interesting question." I never really thought about my work from that perspective. I think with the benefit of time, I've realized, and this is before Marie and I had ever met each other, is I think the benefit of time, what I come to realize is we're actually kind of solving very similar types of puzzles from different professional backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, and so on. Because what Marie does in her work so beautifully is really teach us to clear out everything that does not bring us joy, so we can get in touch with those things that do bring us joy. And what I've done in a lot of my research up until the point of our collaboration was to really teach people to do more with what they have. So to kind of put it in kind of metaphorical terms, in her perspective would be, she'll teach you how to clean out that closet, and teach you, once you've cleaned out that closet, how to still solve all the problems with what few things you have left. And that's really why I think this collaboration worked so well, is because of kind of that synergy in our different perspectives.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that when you were doing the book tour for Stretch, that people were bringing her name up to you. And then it was probably at least a few years later that the two of you wrote together. Was it a couple of years at least, right?
Well, we first started getting together, not that long after Stretch came out, maybe within the first 6 months.
Okay.
Things, they're not quite as bad as academic articles, but it took a while to write the book, and then it takes a while to produce and distribute the book, and especially with kind of speaking in different languages. Right. It's a little longer to write than it normally would. But we started sometime in 2017, I believe.
Okay. Got it.
So yeah.
I see.
You don't just snap your fingers if it were that easy.
I know. Well, I just finished writing my first book, Scott. So I know because I've spent over a year writing my book. So I understand. Yeah, I wanted to pick up on something that was in Joy at Work. I appreciated a lot about the book, and I love the flow and the way it kind of goes, back and forth between some of your parts and some of Marie's parts, and even, some of the areas where it's a chapter that's comes from your work, and yet there are pieces of Marie's work even embedded in your chapters. It's just beautifully organized. I really appreciated that. I was looking at the chapter on, I think it was about your networks, and you had a number of really good questions in here that I thought would be helpful to our listeners, where you talked about, how do you evaluate your contacts to identify, joy sparking relationships? And I thought this was really helpful because I think, again, we were talking a little bit ago about, how people start to feel like their back is up against the wall, or they get either anxious or concerned if they're not doing enough networking when they're looking for that next thing, or maybe they're not talking to the right people, or maybe they should, have 10,000 connections on LinkedIn, or all of these things. And I thought that these questions were really helpful. Which connections do I need for my job? Which connections can help me advance my work-life vision? Which connections bring me joy? Do I smile when I think of this person? Would I be happy to see them soon? Those kinds of questions, I'm not sure that people are always asking themselves. In some ways, those are the kinds of questions I could see almost being more on the almost stretch side of thinking about how you build or nurture your network versus the chasing side of building your network, which is, let's just throw everyone in the pile, never talk to them. But it was, I just thought it was a very thoughtful way of thinking about it, and how you could actually make a lot more meaning out of how you use social media too, in terms of really developing those relationships, whether it's even on LinkedIn or Facebook or otherwise.
There's a distinction between having a large network and having a large network of people who are actually willing to help you.
Yeah.
And when you are in the land of chasing and just trying to accumulate as many connections as you can, and you kind of boast about, how many LinkedIn connections you have, or Facebook, friends that you have, that's very different than being able to go to someone when you need help. Mm-hmm. That's very different than willing to offer someone help when they need it too.
Yeah.
The research shows that we have the capacity for about 150 meaningful connections at a time. Anything beyond that is really just kind of in name only. And my advice is really to focus on nurturing those connections that you find meaningful, not just because you feel like you ought to have more people in your network. There's a lot of kind of talk about kind of how kind of people who you're not very well connected to. We call them kind of more like loose ties. You don't really know them very well. You're more likely to get a job from that. That research is fairly old right now. And given that job postings are out there all the time, anyone can kind of find this stuff is even less relevant. It's different having someone in your, kind of your this weak tie who can, tell you something, versus someone who would actually go to bat for you and say, let me write a letter to the hiring manager and say, I know you, and I think you should interview this person.
Yeah.
Most of us don't have networks like that probably go beyond 50 people. Maybe it's 25, maybe it's even less than that. So if we kind of drop our infatuation and focus more time on nourishing the fewer connections that we find more meaningful, we'll also find them more rewarding, both in terms of like enriching us personally, but also in terms of more even instrumental outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that I know that they say something about all the algorithms, on these sites, and what, how would you be more visible and all of that when it comes to things like LinkedIn. But I think what you're pointing to is, how do you make meaning out of these relationships and have them really be, functionally really helpful. And it's reciprocal too. It's not just about what they can do for you. It's also what you can do for them. And so there's really only a manageable amount, but also a meaningful amount, what you're pointing to out of the research. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, I know I'm glad to be in your LinkedIn network, even though we just met today. So this is great. I really appreciate your time here, Scott. I'm wondering two things. I'm wondering if you were, coming across somebody who was trying to look for their next meaningful or fulfilling engagement work-wise, what would be a key piece of advice you might share with them based on the work that you've done and the changes you've made over the years?
Well, it might turn out that next meaningful opportunity is actually right in front of you. And it doesn't have to be a job change. It doesn't have to be a career change. Maybe it's thinking about or tweaking the job that you have. And to kind of spend some time kind of reflecting on what you already have, as opposed to thinking about what you don't have. And that will focus you inward on things that matter most to you versus the things that you think you ought to be doing because of what other people are doing, or what you're reading on social media, or think are some idealized career paths that someone like you ought to be taking.
I love it. And I know you gave some great examples of that in Stretch as well. So if people are wondering, how do I do that? I recommend strongly that you get your hands on a copy of Stretch. You can also, we will have links for all of this in the show notes. And so if people want to learn more about your work or your books, what's a good place for them to find you?
Best thing is my website, which is just scottsonenshein.com. It's SCOTTSONENSHEIN.com. I've got information on the books. I've got articles. I've applied these concepts not just to work, but to life. I've got stuff about pandemic stuff, how to raise stretchy kids. I've got a bunch of downloadable discussion questions for both books as well.
Oh, great. Well, I think I might be going and looking for more of those as well myself. I love the fact that you have some questions for articles about for stretchy kids, because I think one of the things that's also very important is how we set the example for our kids as we go forward, that when the kids see that we're enjoying our work, they get a great view of what it means to go to work and enjoy what you're doing. So I thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time, and I love all the work that you're doing and look forward to continuing to see it out there.
Oh, thanks so much again for having me on the show. I appreciate it, Tammy.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Scott Sonenshein. It was so interesting to speak with him about his professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at tammygoolerloeb.com. Just look for episode 137. Are you thinking about what your next professional move is going to be? Or perhaps you're feeling just a little stuck? Stay tuned for my new book, Work from the Inside Out. Break through 9 common obstacles to design a career that fulfills you. It will be available in September 2021 in print and digital ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent bookstores. If you were inspired by this episode with Scott, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd appreciate your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at tammygoolerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I'd love to hear how it's going for you. Please drop me a line. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.